Hello everybody, I'm Miss Lisa, and welcome back for our third episode of Watercolor for Kids. Today I'm going to be showing you how to draw and paint this watercolor of an apple and two eggs. Eggs are really fun to do, and we've done apples in a drawing before, and a lot of you have done apples with me when I teach in person. There's just something really fun about painting apples. It's because of the way the colors blend, and I'll show you that today. So we're going to be thinking about not just the items, not just the apple and the two eggs. We're going to be thinking about their shadows today. And we want to make sure that we paint the apple and its shadow, and the egg and its shadow. Here's the egg, here's the shadow, and the second egg and its shadow. And that way it helps the egg and the eggs and the apple look real when they have a shadow. And we're going to be, I'll show you how to do that. But first of all, let's think about what we'll need to do this project. So you will need a piece of paper. And if you have watercolor paper, that would be great. I'm going to do my demonstration today on Canson mixed media paper. So this is good for watercolors as well as other things. You can glue to it. It's slightly heavier than the paper we've been using. And that's good because it holds water in the paper, so it allows for more blending of the colors before they dry out and the pigments can no longer move. So that's kind of important if you want to get these cool blending areas. And so the shadow on this egg and the shadow on this egg, it's all colors run together because the paper is wet. And you might remember that when we did the rainbow fish painting, the same thing happened. When we got the paper nice and wet, the colors moved together a lot easier than if the paper was dry. And so I encourage you to use watercolor paper or something of a mixed media sort of paper if you have it. If you do not, that's okay. Just follow along on regular copier paper and you'll know what's going to happen by watching this video. So you'll know, like, if you had a paper that was slightly thicker, it might look a little bit different. It might look like the effects that I'm getting here. Okay, so we talked about the paper. I'm using the Canson mixed media paper, and I'm going to turn the paper landscape. I'm going to turn it in this orientation so that I can actually fit the apple and the two eggs in the picture, something like this. I'm also using paints, watercolor paints, and this is my Crayola watercolor set, and this is the one that I teach with a lot. Now, instead of using the brush that comes with the set, this brush here, I'm actually going to be using my larger brush just because it has picks up more water and more pigment at the same time. So I've got more ability to put color on the paper, and I have more ability to put water on the paper and move it around before it dries. So that's why I use a slightly bigger brush when I can. And you might remember when we did the painting of the white daisies that we mixed a darker green by taking the green color and putting a little bit of red into it. And it not only made the sort of reddy color, but it also made the dark greens that you see here. There's a nice area of dark green. So we're going to be doing the reverse today. We're going to be putting green on the palette, and we're going to put a little bit of red into it. And what do you think that's going to do? If you said you think it's going to darken the red, you're right. And so we're going to use that in some of these areas that we want a darker red. And we're also going to mix some dark colors to go under the egg and the apple as the part where the light won't hit. So that really makes a darker shadow closer to the apple and the egg, and then that shadow kind of gets less distinct. It gets fuzzier as you move away from the apple and the eggs. So let's get started with the drawing. Oh, I forgot to say, you probably will want a pencil. So I've got my 2B pencil here. I might normally use a lighter pencil, maybe a 2H in my first drawing. But because I'm doing this darker, the drawing darker so that you'll be able to see it when you look at the video, I'm using a 2B pencil. So I'm just going to place this up here. And the first thing we're going to do in the drawing is to think about our shapes. So the apple shape is kind of like a sphere, but it has more of a flat top. And it has, from where I'm sitting, I see kind of a little point at the bottom. Of course, you might not see the same thing because your angle will be slightly different than mine. And then the eggs are kind of like an oval, but you know, eggs tend to be a little bit pointier on one end and more rounded on the other end. So we're going to try to put that information in the drawing as well. So it's like an oval, but it's slightly pointier on one end and rounder on the other end. And my shadows are going to help you be able to see the orientation of the egg. So when my egg is in this orientation with the tip pointing this direction, my shadow is going to follow that shape. When my egg is in this direction, in this orientation, and the tip is pointing this way, my shadow is going to follow the form of the egg. Okay, so let's move this out of the way so we can see all of our shadows. And let's get to work on the drawing. So my first item for the drawing is going to be the apple, and I'm going to put that apple about here. And if you need to pause the video to go ahead and do your drawing, that is absolutely fine. So I'm using a very light pressure at the moment to start my drawing. I don't want to go too dark because then the line will be a dominant feature of this drawing, of this painting. Okay, now I'm making a little dip in the front here at the top where the stem is going to come out. And from my view, that stem is facing kind of towards me and I can see the end of it, so I'll just give that kind of shape. And I can put some lines like this just to remind myself that when I paint this, I want the red to be going in different directions. That helps it look like an apple when the red comes down the side like this. Okay, and I'm going to make, next thing I'm going to do is put in an egg shape. And I'm mentally measuring that egg shape so that this direction, this dimension, is perhaps half the height of the apple. And if this is confusing what I'm saying, you might want to go back to, you might want to look at the video that we posted yesterday about drawing the containers, because I talk about mental measuring in that video too. Okay, now notice that this egg is not going to, this egg touches the apple, but this one does not. And this one is far enough away that there's actually a little bit, I see some space between those eggs. And I also want to show that it's facing another direction. So the tip is going to be, the pointy end is going to be facing this way. I have to make this end more rounded. Now remember when I did a drawing class, first drawing class of this series was about in front of and behind. So I showed kids how to draw something that looks like it's in front of something else. And in this case, the egg is in front of the apple. And so I can draw both of those things together. and overlap them, and then use an eraser and just remove that overlap. So the thing that's in front will be, you'll see the whole bit of it, and the thing that's behind, it'll be missing a chunk. Okay, and that's what we're going to show here, so that it looks like the egg is in front of the apple. Now I want to add the shadow, and I'm not going to be too concerned with its shape. It's just going to be, the shadow is always opposite the light, and it's a little bit difficult because you can't see my light, but I have a light up above that has 3 light bulbs in it. So that's causing slightly different shapes for the shadows, but I'm going to pretend there's only 1 light bulb and draw the dominant shape. So you can see the shadow there. You can see it. Underneath. Okay, I'm just going to stop the video right here because I'm not entirely sure you can see it, and I'm going to show you a little, going to record a little bit and show you what I'm seeing. Okay, so this is the shadow area, and you can see this main shadow from the apple and a smaller shadow from one egg, and then this shadow from the other egg. And this is how I've drawn it. I'm sorry that it's a little bit shaky. It's off the tripod now, but you can see that here's the apple and its shadow, and the first egg and its shadow, and the second egg and its shadow. And the shadows should be facing slightly different directions because this egg is in this orientation, so the shadow should be facing this way. And this egg is in this orientation, so the shadow, the point of the shadow should be facing this direction. And in fact, I'm just going to trim that one slightly so it looks more like it's in line with the egg. Okay, I'm going to stop this and put it back on the tripod now. Okay, so my other camera is back on the tripod now, and I'm back to showing you how to do the rest of this piece of art. So I'm going to be drawing now a little bit more carefully, just to sort of finish up the drawing, because remember I said that this egg is facing this direction, so I'm going to add a little bit more of a point to it. And this side should be rounded. The shadow should be rounded. And it's going to be a little bit more pointed on this end. And this egg is facing this direction, so its point is this way. And the back is more rounded. And I want this shadow to come more like this. And I'm just going to tidy up a little bit of that now with my eraser. You don't want to erase too much. I just want to tidy up those lines. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to, and you can see here, I should have showed you one more thing. Here the shadows kind of overlap, so I'm just going to get rid of that line, and what I actually see is this. Now what I want to do is take a lot of yellow paint, and I'm going to paint over the entire apple and its shadow, and the first egg and its shadow. I'm going to jump over here and paint the second egg and its shadow with the yellow paint. So first of all, we have to resuspend the pigment. So I want the paint to be nice and drippy and not too strong in pigment. So it's got to be a lot of water, and I'm just going to paint over the apple. And when I say over, I mean over everything. And here's the shadow shape. And I'm not being super careful about making sure that everything's evenly covered. I'm just putting the color down, not stressing about how nicely it's on the paper. I just want to cover those shapes up. Now, because the paper's wet in those areas that I just put the yellow paint on, I know if I put another color on over the yellow, the colors are going to run together because the pigment is going to be able to disperse in the water. It's going to be able to move and mix. And we saw that when we did rainbow fish. Remember when we did this painting here, when we got the green next to the blue, and in some areas on the fish as well, when we got some of the watercolor next to wet paper, the pigment or the color in that paint would start to run because the paper's wet, and so there's a lot of water to carry the color. You can think of it that way. The water carries the color. If there's water on your entire piece of paper, there's going to be lots of ways for the pigments to mix before the paper dries. And we saw a lot of that down here with the seaweed and the water. We tried to keep the fish not quite so wet, so we had some areas where, like here, the green is pretty much where we put it, and the red is pretty much where we put it. But some of these other areas, like here, were flowing together. So let's see what we're going to do. The paper is dried just a tiny bit while I was talking, and that's good because if I put the red on top of that yellow immediately, it's just all going to mix until it turns orange. And I don't want the whole thing to be orange. I want to have some areas of red. So you can see in this one, where I put the red in these areas, it's not running so much as over here because the paper was wetter over here. So let's see. I have to resuspend my red. And also I'm thinking about the direction that I'm going to be painting the red on. You can see that if this was the center of a circle on top of the apple, that the color comes out from there and down. So the same way that it comes out from the top of the apple, I want my red to come out from here and down. And that just kind of helps it look real. Now you can see that where the yellow is wet, which is all over the paper right now, that the red is going to be mixing in with that yellow. And I don't want to cover the whole thing with red. I just want to leave, you can see there's some areas of yellow still showing on the apple. So I'm just going to put this down, and then I'm going to leave it alone and let the colors mix. It's really hard when you do watercolor to leave things alone. Hard for me anyways. I always want to keep working at the colors, mixing them a little bit more. But really, it's good just to let them do their thing. Okay, so I'm going to go away from the apple now, and I'm going to look at these eggs. And I know that if I put wet paint next to that red, you can see the red is starting to run into the egg right here. If I put something like purple on top of this yellow, and by the way, purple and yellow is going to make a brown color, so I'm going to get a color similar to a brown egg. But if I put the purple too close to the edge of my egg, it's going to start running into the red of the apple. And some of the red is going to be running into the purple. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of area that doesn't have any purple. And the same thing when we did the daisy painting, you might remember that we were able to get some of the colors in between the petals. But if we got too much, if the paper was too wet, like up here, the color just started running into the white anyway. So we have to leave a little bit of paper that's not quite as wet as the rest of it. So I'm going to take my purple. In fact, I'm not going to put any color right there for the moment. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put some purple on the side of this egg, and I'm going to leave it. And I'm going to take some purple and I'm going to put it in the shadow too. So I'm going to put the shadow color right here. Being mindful of the shape of the shadow. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Now with this egg, I'm going to mix some brown into it as well. You can see when I painted the other one, it was actually brown mixed into the yellow. Just to give it a little bit of variety, I wanted one that was a little bit browner and one that was a little bit lighter. Okay, so I have to be very careful when I paint this shadow because the colors are going to completely mix together. If I don't leave just a little bit of dry paper, I'm going to leave just a tiny bit there and let it mix on this side. Okay, let me take a little bit of brown. I'm also going to take a little bit of brown and put it into the shadow of the apple. And I also need a little bit of red in there because the shadow always has a little bit of the color of the thing you're painting. And I'm not too worried about it. I can change it after the paper dries. I'm going to want to make the edges a little bit fuzzier than they are. Okay, so while this is mixing happily by itself, I'm going to start thinking about a background, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did here in this painting. I'm going to use purple as a background color. And one of the reasons is that purple and yellow are complementary colors, meaning they're across from each other on the color wheel, and the complementary colors just look good together. And so we put the yellow down first for the apple and the eggs. Sometimes we call that an underpainting when we put a color down and then work on top of it. So this painting has an underpainting of yellow. So I know that if I put purple around it, it's going to look pretty good because yellow and purple go well together. The other thing I'm going to do is make a couple areas of highlight, but I'm not going to work on those yet because the paper has to be pretty dry to do that. What we're going to do is actually pull some of the color off in these areas where the light is reflecting off the smooth surface of the eggs and the apple. When you have a smooth surface and you shine a light on it, you'll see an area that's lighter, even though it isn't really lighter, it just appears to be lighter. So you're seeing something that isn't there. It's just a light reflecting off the surface, so it looks light. And that's important to put in your painting because it helps your brain decide what you're looking at. That tells your brain that you're looking at something smooth and kind of rounded, and it's catching light. So we want to do that in a minute. Let's take some of this violet or purple color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting this on my paper, but I'm going to be very careful not to get it right up to the egg because we know what's going to happen. It's going to mix in with the yellow, and it's going to mix all over the place because the paper's wet. Same for this egg. I want to go not quite up to the edge. Oh, you can see I made a couple accidental bridges there, but that's okay. That will just add to the interest. Watercolor paintings have somewhat of a spontaneous feeling to them because it's hard to control the paint exactly. As soon as you put water in the paint, it's going to want to move, and sometimes it's okay just to let it do its own thing. It's good to understand why the paint is moving. It's good to know that it's moving to the direction where there's more water. So because this is wetter here, the pigment wants to move that direction instead of purple going in here. It's moving that way. And here, you can see there was more water in the purple that we put down because the yellow was starting to dry. There's more water here, so the pigment is going that way as the water is pulling the purple outwards. Now I can also put some water on the paper here and just drop some color in. And maybe I'll put a little blue up here too for interest. Maybe it doesn't want to be all purple. Okay, this is pretty wet now. Nice and wet and soggy. So I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes, and I'll see you again soon. Hi, I'm back. Somehow my last bit of video recording did not record, so I have to explain what I did. I was painting a little bit more from the last time I saw you, and I'll just have to explain what I did because I'm missing a little bit of footage. I'm missing a few minutes of recording. So what I did was when I first came back, you might remember this edge was very distinct. It was a very sharp edge. It's called a sharp edge because the color stops like a sharp edge. It's not diffuse. So that sharp edge and that sharp edge and that sharp edge, I went ahead and softened them. And when I say softened, I mean it's not as sharp anymore, right? It's kind of diffuse. And I did that by taking some water and just going over the edge like this. And with these Crayola paints, it moves some of that pigment away from the edge and into this area here. And we can just keep pulling it along to make the tabletop. And I went to the next shape here, which is the shadow of the egg, and I did the same thing. So I went over the edge, and that's pulling some of the purple off of the shadow and into this area for the tabletop. And I can sort of have the brown from the apple there and the purple from the egg shadow mixing, and that looks nice. And so I've just done the same thing here. I pulled some of that pigment from the shadow into the area where the table would be. And the other thing I did was I took some brown and I went over this egg here, and then I did this shadow here, and I was starting to work on the apple. So I took some brown without much water in it, and I just made this shape here. Come down and up and outwards, and that looks like this part of the apple. Okay, you can see it in this painting here. So I did this part here. Okay, so we're back to, I've got you caught up now. That was 4 minutes as I was telling it, and that's the part that's missing. So we'll just skip along now, and this is where we are. And we are going to now do a little bit more to make the apple and the shadow a little bit distinct, while at the same time we want them to feel like they belong to each other. So I need some darker red. So if I take some red, and I mix it with some green. We've been having a lot of problems with power these last couple days and losing it. And I think all of the flickering of lights today is affecting my video recording. Okay, so now we've got this darker red color, and we're going to put that down here. In fact, it needs more red. When I put it down there by the tabletop, you can see it looks more like brown. But if we put some red into it, now it's a dark red color again. And so I'm going to bring that color up here. And I can soften those edges by getting my brush wet and just pulling that along. And that'll encourage it to mix with what I've got. I'm also going to take some of that color and put it here, a little bit here, behind the egg to kind of make it distinguished, make it look like it's not the same shape. It needs to be two different shapes, the apple and the egg. I think I also want to take some yellow and add some more yellow to that apple. So I have to wash my brush really well because I don't want to get other colors into my yellow. I'm just going to put a little bit more yellow in this. I think I also want just a little bit onto this egg here. Brighten that one up a bit. Okay, now I'm going to take a tissue and I want to blot the areas where there's a highlight. So you can see the highlight here. You might be able to see it on this egg. There's one highlight here, there's one here, and there's this area of the apple. So I'm going to just pull a little bit of the color off of the egg by pressing a tissue to it, and that should pull up the color. If it's dry or drying, you can get the tissue wet and pull it up. See how the color comes off? I'll show you again. I'll do it here. Will show it better on the red. I'm just going to pull up this area here with the tissue. You can use your paintbrush to actually put a little bit of water there to help it along. See that? So there we've got a nice highlight. Let's put a little bit of water with our paintbrush here. And very gently, you can go round and round on your paper. You have to be careful doing that because it can damage your brush. Okay, now I've got a highlight here, here, and here. And that just kind of helps us know that the surface of these three objects is reflecting light, and that makes us feel like they're rounded and smooth, which is true. They have rounded surfaces and they're smooth, and that's why the light reflects nicely. Now I want to put a little bit more dark color under the apple and the egg, and then I think we'll be finished. And I'm going to use the purple without much water. So if I use purple without putting too much water into it, so let me show you. My brush is wet. Now that's going to be really concentrated. You can see on the paper towel how it comes out. So if I put some of that just under part of the egg, not under the whole thing, just a little bit, you can see the dark area right under the egg there. And there's a dark area under this egg right there. And the apple. And the shadow kind of comes out here. So I'm just using my wet paintbrush to kind of blend it just a little bit. You want to leave the main part of it dark. Oh, I almost forgot the stem. So we've got this area here. We've left a little space for the stem. And I'm going to make that, I'm going to put some black and brown together in there because it's the darkest area. It goes down. I'm going to put a little bit of brown in there too. Now you see what happened here. The paper's wet, and so the color wants to run out. So I'm going to have to revise that idea. I just pulled it back off again with my paintbrush. And I can carefully blot it with the tissue so it kind of dries that area. But I'm going to have to make that paint really, really dry. So hardly any water. And I should be able to get the stem. Drop that little shape in there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. We'll call it a day here. And let's just review what we did. We learned how to paint this still life, an apple and 2 eggs. And we drew the still life to look like this egg was in front of that apple by overlapping the shapes slightly. I'm just going to take a little bit of that off there. I'm really bad about just leaving my watercolors. There we go. So this egg looks like it's in front of this apple because you can see the overlap. And then this egg looks like it's in front of both of these. And the shape of the shadow will help you get the shape of the egg because they're basically going to be very similar. You've got your egg shape, it's going to cast a shadow like this. This egg is facing this direction, the point is this direction, so it's going to cast a shadow in this shape. It's very important that your shadow shapes help describe what you're drawing and painting. Now the apple is here and its shadow shape is here. And we painted them all with yellow first. It has a yellow underpainting. And then we went over it again with some red to give the look of these almost color stripes on the apple. They're not really stripes, but the red is starting in the center and comes outwards. And so we can get that effect by using red in that way. And we used a darker red to give some shadow down here. And we made that by taking the red paint and putting a little tiny bit of green into it. And if it looks too green, just put a little bit more red in it when you mix. You can use the lid of your paint tray for mixing. And then we put shadow on the eggs with a very dilute purple. And we also put a little bit of a brown wash, so a very dilute brown over the eggs. And we just finished up we put the background color in, which is mostly violet or purple, with a little bit of blue. And we sort of feathered the shadow a little bit by taking a wet paintbrush and going along the edges to soften that really hard edge of the shadow, and then pulling some of that pigment away from the shadow to make this table. It looks like a tabletop. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot today, but I hope you had a lot of fun with this. And I hope that someday, if you're practicing on regular copy paper, I hope someday you'll be able to find some watercolor paper and work along with us. It feels really different, and it's a fun experience. When we start doing classes back at the MAC, hopefully you can sign up for classes there, and we do provide watercolor paper. So until that point, make sure that you stay safe, wear your mask when you go outside, and wash your hands well when you're inside. And remember to socially distance. Have some fun with art, practice, and stay safe and have fun. Goodbye.